Hello everybody, welcome to Snapshot for Queensland Council's webinar number 3. We're looking at a bit of transport data follow-up. Next steps, we've got discussions on greenhouse alliances and city power partnership, lots of awesome guests and a lot of time for Q&A. My name's Alexi Lynch from Ironbark Sustainability. Before anything, I'd just like to acknowledge the First Nation people throughout the nation, where I'm speaking from on the traditional lands of the people of the Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge that the land on which we meet was never ceded. Here is the agenda for today. So we've got some, pretty awesome guests. I'm going to give you a little update on Snapshot. Our last webinar in this series was about a month or so ago, but there are just a couple of small things that we can go through. Then we've got David Micklejohn from the Northern Alliance for Greenhouse Action and also Climate Emergency Australia to talk a little about alliances, which is quite exciting in the context of what's happening in Queensland at the moment. Portia Odell from Cities Power Partnership and Matt Sullivan from Ironbark Sustainability, who is one of the main brains behind Snapshot. And we've got a few questions that have come through that we'll be peppering to him. A little bit of housekeeping. I think most of you, by the looks of it, have been at these previous ones, but we can't hear you and that will stay that way. So if you've got any questions, please jump into the GoToWebinar question box. Jump in there, ask the questions and it'll come through here to me. Keep your questions coming at any time. Preferably just let us know who it is that you have the question for. Jump in, ask away. Ironbark, this is us. We work with councils around Australia. For those that haven't been to any of these before, councils and their communities on climate change projects and programs. We work on lighting, smart lighting, climate program, which is based on the sort of discussion we're having today and where Snapshot sits under buildings and broader sustainability. Beyond Zero Emissions, who aren't presenting today but are the co-founder, if you like, and co-parent of Snapshot. Beyond Zero Emissions are an internationally recognised climate change think tank. They produce independent and innovative research solutions demonstrating that net zero emissions Australia is achievable and totally affordable. Some of their reports are quite exceptional. If you haven't had a chance to look through the Million Jobs Plan or Rethinking Cement, amongst others, definitely worth jumping on, subscribing and having a look. But they are our Snapshot partners. And this is you. These are the people that have registered. Thank you for registering. Thank you for letting us use your name and your council. Otherwise, there might have been a couple that have jumped on towards the end that we're missing there. But just to give you an idea, I guess, of who's in the room today. This is the feedback from the first webinar. The feedback has been fantastic. So after every webinar, we've caught up with Alice and Susan from the DES and from Dorian from LGAQ to go through where we're going to focus the next one. And we really do appreciate this feedback. It's been quite consistent throughout, which is great. This was from the last one a month or so ago. Generally, we've found throughout that everyone has found it informative. It's lovely to hear that it's been inspiring and hopeful at times as well. We note rushed at times, and I think my favourite comment that I've ever received, which is pithy or pithy, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but I did look it up afterwards. Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit informal and perhaps like that. We're going to take it a little bit easier and not rush through it as much this time. And so there is going to be a lot more chance for Q&A. So we're wrapping it all up with an informal one where you can essentially ask all the questions that you like. Okay, a really brief snapshot update. So transport's been a big focus from the last couple of weeks and months. If you remember last time we met, we talked about how Snapshot has data from stationary emissions, so from residential, industrial and commercial sectors. We've got gas, we've got waste and agriculture and transport. And one of the big changes over the last 6 months or so has been the incorporation of transport data from Google, which means we move away from modelled transport data, which is high level, which is the way essentially every single emissions profile ever developed is developed through data that is top down, to, for the first time ever, real activity data, where you actually are looking at the information based on the activity within a municipality. We had an update as well last month. We had 3 councils that had Google Transport data and a couple that were to come in the second tranche. It's worth jumping on now to have a look, because the latest update from Google just in the last day or so actually is some changes to the interface. So you can jump in now and check Oceania. So it's just insights, or just Google EIE and you'll be able to find out. But what we've got now is the ability to draw down into the Oceania and the Australian region, and you'll find that there are a lot more Queensland councils on there and a lot more that will be coming. There's also on EIE at the moment the ability to perform year-on-year analysis on transport emissions for 3 consecutive years, which is quite interesting, especially post-pandemic recovery and looking at, I guess, investment for cities around the world. And there's a blog post that's coming out soon that'll go into a little bit of detail about their methodology and assumptions. And of course, you can also bring it to us, if you like, with questions. Speaking of questions, I'm going to take this one as a comment. And pithy is good. Brief, forceful, and meaningful in expression. Thank you very much. Told you it's going to be informal. Another update, just quietly behind the scenes. We've been looking at the different ways that we can, I guess, chop and change the data that we've got. And so BZE and Ironbark, through Snapshot, received a grant from the Telematics Trust to look at whether the data can be put and explained there, not just according to municipal boundary, but sliced and diced according to electoral boundary or federal electoral boundary. So this is something that's coming up soon, just to keep an eye out for. And finally, there's some updates to the governance of Snapshot. So since Snapshot started a couple of years ago, it's just been sort of hell for leather, smashing, developing, updating it, looking at better data sets, looking at partnerships, and just trying to rush and get as much as we can done. Ironbark and BZE engaged a consultant to help us develop some updated governance to see how we work with all the organisations and partners, I guess, that want to be involved. And so watch this space again if you really are interested. As we talked about in the first webinar, Snapshot is intended to essentially be a public good, for want of a better word. So the ability is that the data, the information and the IP that comes in goes back out to everyone. It also means that if you want to be involved, then you can come and have a chat and you can get involved in the development, whether it's around the data side of things, partnerships, action planning, who knows, we're not sure how it'll pan out, but you can come and get involved. All right, I'm going to now pass on to David Micklejohn, who is the Executive Officer of the Northern Alliance for Greenhouse Action and the Coordinator of Climate Emergency Australia. David, as I change presenters and make you presenter, I'm going to give you an introduction. So by now, you do have the controls and I can see your desktop, so that's great. So David's worked extensively in sustainability behaviour change programs as a consultant within government here in Australia and the UK. He's also completing a PhD on how councils use community engagement programs to respond to climate change. You're at NAGA and you're going to give a bit of a background on the work that NAGA do, where David's been for 7 years, and also working as heading up Climate Emergency Australia, which became operational mid last year, hosted by the City of Melbourne and run by NAGA and funded by 13 other founder councils. As we know, I think about 100 odd councils now have declared climate emergencies. Dave's heading up the Climate Emergency Australia network, which is the councils, and he's going to tell us what's going on with alliances, emergency, and ready for questions. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Lex. Everyone see that okay at the moment, I think? I'm going to go through this relatively quickly so you can have more time for questions at the end, but I'll be mainly looking at what the Victorian Greenhouse Alliance model is and what we do. I'll touch a little bit on Climate Emergency Australia, but I'm conscious that there's a lot of activity in Queensland at the moment around developing an alliance model there. So what I thought would be useful for you is to get a feel for what we do and how it works, and what are the pros and cons of that. I'm going to focus primarily on my own Greenhouse Alliance and use that as a bit of a model for what everyone else does. And we'll talk a little bit about how the different alliances work. So I cover 9 councils in northern metropolitan Melbourne, which go from sort of inner city and CBD-based councils like Melbourne and Yarra, out through sort of mid-suburban councils to growth areas and sort of urban fringe councils like Hume, Whittlesea and Nillumbee. The activities of Greenhouse Alliances generally fall into these 4 compartments, and they're all pretty similar depending, no matter which alliance you're in. We do projects, we do some advocacy on behalf of members, we do networking to share best practice and build capacity of members, and we do a lot of research into emerging issues. So just give you a quick run through on each of these. In terms of projects, I just wanted to give you a flavour of the sort of things we do. We do a little bit. We do a number of feasibility studies, and we've done one recently on looking at council fleets. And okay, so I'll keep going. We've just done some training materials for councillors, which was funded by the state government, and that's now being delivered. So this is the idea of how do you build climate change into everything that you do in terms of governance, and in particular because we've just got a lot of new councillors come in. We had local government elections late last year, making sure they're aware of their roles and responsibilities with regard to climate change. And then the last project which Lex mentioned is around developing Climate Emergency Australia. So kind of the sort of stuff that we do at NAGA on a national scale, but also recognising that governing in the climate emergency is slightly different, probably a little bit more cutting edge and radical than governing, without being in an emergency. And so we're trying to work out what that actually means, and also to be a voice of advocacy for those particular councils. In terms of advocacy, we do both formal and informal advocacy. And what I mean by that is formal advocacy is things like the state government puts out a request for consultation, we'll respond to it, and that'll be on a whole range of issues like new strategies, climate change targets and so on. But we'll also do a lot of informal advocacy. We have pretty good contacts throughout state government departments, and so we can go and have coffee with people and say, this is the sort of thing that we're wanting to be able to see in a piece of legislation that might be coming up. We do a lot of work around energy regulatory processes. We recognise this is something that's sort of beyond the immediate scope of local government, but it actually has a really important impact. So things like energy markets, changes and rules and regulations. We work with people like the Total Environment Centre up in Sydney to develop advocacy and to develop input into those processes. And we'll do work that has direct benefits for members, direct financial benefits. So every 5 years, the Australian Energy Regulator, for example, does a price review, and it asks what the prices that energy distributors are going to put on things like changing street lights. We hire very reputable consultants like Ironbark Sustainability to do this kind of work. And don't worry, they didn't pay me to say that. But it actually has a really strong impact. So the last review that we did for the 9 NAGA councils, we saved our councils over $7 million in forward payments in terms of getting lower costs considered by the regulator as part of that review. So it's a really important and direct, obvious piece of advocacy that we can do. Information sharing and networking is a really key part of what we do. We run one annual conference across all the Greenhouse Alliances. Last one we held was in 2019. We had about 300 people attending. We're planning our next one in October this year. We are looking at how we might make that available to interstate attendees. We do specialist networks within our particular local government network. So we'll have ones for, say, fleet managers, for economic development officers, for risk managers and so on, because they're often really specific things that they want to address that aren't necessarily the whole gamut of everything that you might want to do in climate change. We'll run usual webinars on climate risk, on climate communications, on community engagement, a whole range of issues that might come up. And we provide a daily email, which is a quick summary of what's happening in climate news. So if you're interested in getting onto that, then just please let me know in chat. We have a pretty good research relationship with a couple of universities down here, RMIT and Melbourne University in particular. So we get students who are either doing master's students or final year sustainability students to work for us. And this is just a quick example of some of the things that we've done in the past. The first one around the exploring the viability of local government as an electricity retailer, that was a role that local governments used to play in Victoria up until the 1990s. And we were looking at basically the models that were being explored in Germany and the United States and seeing whether that could be applicable to Victoria. That's actually led now into a project being led by the City of Melbourne, which is looking to establish a local government retailer. And the idea behind this is it will be 100% renewable energy retailer, and you'll be able to get to audiences that find it difficult to put on solar. So, for example, if you've got lots of small businesses that are on tenanted premises, or you've got lots of apartments like the City of Melbourne does, the limits for the ability to put solar on as your main source of renewable energy is really limited, but a retailer might be a good answer to that. So, this is an example of a piece of research that was done coming up to 4 years ago now, and is now actually leading into a real project. In terms of how we work, the governance of NAGA, and this isn't the only model, there's slight variations on this between the different greenhouse alliances. We have a secretariat of staff, so 2 full-time staff or full-time equivalents. We actually have 3 staff across that. And we're housed within a council in Hume City Council on the northern boundary of Melbourne. We report to an executive which meets quarterly, and they're decision makers within council. So they're either councillors or senior executives. So basically, we need people who can turn up to a meeting and make a decision on behalf of their council. We can't have them going back to council. And that's a really important thing when you're thinking about governance models, to make sure that you've got people who have some influence within council and also can make decision on their behalf. Below that, if you like, we have an implementation forum, which is for officers, and that's much more a networking and sharing best practice and project development sort of space. And we're funded by our members. So our members put in, at the moment, it's around about $25,000 a year. That increases in line with the rate cap amount in Victoria, which is set for this financial year at a 1.5% increase. So yeah, that allows us to be able to not only employ staff, but also do all the projects we want to be able to do. I mentioned the other greenhouse alliances. There are 7 alliances across Victoria, 4 in the metro area and 3 in the regional area, including one which has just started this year, late last year, which is Barwood Southwest Greenhouse Alliance, covering sort of the very far southwest coast of Victoria. We do a lot of work together, and that's increased over the years, whether it's projects like the PPA I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of advocacy work, so the planning work I mentioned that we're doing, a review of the planning system, that's right across all the greenhouse alliances, and networking. So we'll run things, it just doesn't make sense for each of us to repeat that kind of work that another greenhouse alliance is able to do, and especially now that everyone's much more used to working online, we really try and do as much of that co-networking as possible. And we have, I would say, an informal relationship with the state government. The state government initially funded the development of greenhouse alliances, but it doesn't anymore. So that allows us to keep some independence, which is useful at times, but it's not an antagonistic relationship that we have with the state government. We have a lot of people who've worked in our councils and in our greenhouse alliances and now working in state government departments. That's a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to influence legislation and policy and funding and strategies and so on. So yeah, it's an interesting relationship. We don't always agree with what the state government's doing, but we recognise, that they're generally in alignment on what we're both wanting to be able to do. And I think that's it. That's me done, Lex.
Thanks, Dave. That was fantastic. While I pass on to Portia, there is a question here. If a council's in alliance, do you have to do the same things? I think you sort of touched on this. What if we're more or less advanced and have different challenges?
Yeah, no, we don't at all. So, for example, the project I mentioned earlier about setting up a retailer, that's really only applicable to a number of our councils. Like Melbourne and Yarra in particular are interested in that. So for a number of the councils that just don't have any interest in that, that's fine. They can just step out of that and just allow a smaller group of councils to be able to lead that. And they may want to jump on that further down the track. Absolutely fine.
Thanks, David. Portia, can you hear us? I've given you control.
Yes, I've got it, Lex.
Great. So while Portia's just getting ready, I'm just going to give her a quick introduction. Portia's the director of the Cities Power Partnership, where she leads the delivery of the program's strategy and impact, holds a PhD from Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute, and a history of working with communities, startups, governments, helping to accelerate their climate projects. She's passionate about advancing the critical work of local governments taking meaningful action on climate and interested in the intersection between research, innovation and policy. It's a few themes there between our speakers. And so Portia is running what is now the largest local government climate program in Australia. I think 140 councils and counting. There's a lot going on, some brilliant work from CPP. Portia, over to you.
Thanks, Lex. So I'll keep mine pretty brief as well. And I know many of the people in the audience today are actually already CPP members, so I won't dive too deep in an overview of the program. But as Lex said, the Cities Power Partnership is Australia's largest network of cities acting on climate change. We actually now have 145 councils across Australia. We're distributed all over Australia. As you can see, we have 11 councils in Queensland, and we really exist to give councils and local governments the tools, connections, and momentum to take meaningful action on climate. So we do that in a number of ways through advocacy, with joint statements on various topical issues. We have a biannual CPP summit, which is actually at the end of May. I encourage you all to sign up if you haven't already. It's free. And we do a lot of collaboration with looking at how we can facilitate projects between councils and give councils the information they need to advance their climate initiatives. So what I'll touch on today is, I guess, keeping along that same stream of collaboration and alliances, is I'll talk a little bit about the work we're doing within the Hunter Valley. So with the Hunter Valley, the Hunter Valley has a joint organization, so it's called the Hunter Joint Organization. It's a co of all the councils you see here. They group together and meet to discuss issues relevant to them. And what they've done is we've partnered with the Hunter Joint Organization, the Cities Power Partnership has, because what we've seen is we really want to, while we're a national program, to come in and help amplify the work that's already being done by great organizations. So what we've come to do with the Hunter Joint Organization is come and see if we can identify some opportunities for collaboration. So some of these councils, such as Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, are further ahead on the journey. So that to that question earlier, there's, I guess, varying levels of ambition and where they're at in the journey. However, what we've done with them is looking at, are there opportunities for us to work on projects together that's still relevant to everybody. So some of the discussions that have been happening are revolving around an EV charging network that is a regional charging network, which I believe Naga's already actually done some great pieces of research for Victorian councils. I encourage you to have a look at that. They've done a great report. And some in large scale solar and how that can work. And some of these discussions we've been having that underpin all of these conversations is looking at community emissions profile and how they can implement projects that are not just beyond council emissions, but also and the way that we work with partners such as Hunter Joint Organization and other organizations such as NAGA is we really try and come in and see if there's gaps that we can fill. The last thing we want to do is recreate the wheel. We don't want to come in if we're not needed, and we want to amplify the work and add to it. So the way that we can do that is we have access, obviously, to a national network of local governments and other stakeholders who are acting on climate, and we can really facilitate that knowledge sharing component, as well as leverage off of our connections with the Climate Council, because we are a free program that exists under the Climate Council, so we have access to their latest research as well as all the experts that they have access to. In addition, we're also looking at launching a new Council Connects. This is going to be an online collaboration platform that's a national platform for all councils that are part of the Cities Power Partnership. And we're really looking forward to that to really facilitate that collaboration. Another thing that we are looking into is how Hunter Joint Organization and other joint organizations or organizations like NAGA can actually join the Cities Power Partnership to help advance climate initiatives within their community. So that's a new model that we're testing just to see how we can help amplify that work. Lessons learned, I guess, just from our perspective, having worked with the HJO, is really having that importance of the key facilitator. They're really keen on getting other members of council stakeholders on board, such as the CEOs. There's a specific engagement they have with the CEOs to get buy-in from those councils. That's been really successful in getting buy-in across the council, so engaging them directly and having specific meetings just with the council CEOs. And focusing on that shared interests. So not all councils have the same pledges. So when you become a member, you have to pledge. However, there are some similar streams and themes across all councils, and focusing on those shared interests has been really great. And also a big arm of what Cities Power Partnership does is tries to give a strong media arm. So having some unified messages across councils and giving them training on how they can communicate with their community has been really successful, and a great approach that we found with HJO. And just the last one, I know many of you in this room have probably already signed up to this, or you might not be able to go. We've already had a discussion with you, but we are holding an event in Queensland in 2 weeks' time. That Parliament has a two-part event. We'll be focusing our part one on PPAs, as well as renewable energy, and part two is a showcase that will have state government ministers and MPs, and we'll focus on the solution. That's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Portia. That was a great snapshot, and really exciting to hear that, yeah, looking into models where alliances can, or other organisations can join Cities Power Partnership. That's fantastic. A quick question before we move on to Matt, and then we'll have a much bigger Q&A session. Have councils achieved their pledges, and what happens when you achieve a pledge?
Yes, so we do have councils achieve their pledges, I guess, on a rolling basis. So it really depends on what kind of pledge it is, whether it's installing LEDs or if it's a larger scale renewable energy project. But as they complete them, well, they'll let us know and they select new pledges. So we're encouraging councils on a continuing basis to select new pledges.
Gotcha. And how have other CPP councils in other states used the program, I guess, to advance and, you know, go further and increase ambition?
We found that a lot of, we do an annual awards ceremony. So that's been, we've gotten some feedback from councils that that's been really helpful for them to get recognized for their work so that they can continue to grow that within council. A lot of councils across the country will ask us if other councils are doing a particular initiative and ask to be connected. There's a lot of knowledge sharing that goes across. Often it's what councils want to know what other councils are doing. So that's been a really key element of what we do, and what we're trying to facilitate more and more, hence why we're trying to establish a Council Connect platform, which will be a national platform for everybody. So the collaboration piece is very useful and has been really great.
Awesome. Thanks, Portia, much appreciated. I'm now going to go back and share my screen, which I'm just going to assume everybody can see. I'm going to now quickly introduce Matt Sullivan, but just want to explain the reason why we've got him here. As people may recall from previous webinars when we discussed the start of Snapshot and why we've done what we've done and developed it like it has been developed. And of course, the recording for the previous ones are all online. We talked about how underpinning, you know, any emissions profile, you need to use the Global Protocol for community scale greenhouse gas emissions inventories. And so this underpins all of the data that you see on Snapshot. It's used to make sure that the data, the measurement, the methodology is all agreed upon, and it's also been used by and developed by all the organisations, the key global organisations. There's a lot of stuff that sits under the bonnet of this, and if you Google GPC climate, you can download that 200-page document and get into it. Some people enjoy it, some people don't. If you're a data person, you might like it, but it tells you all the different ways that you can use the data that you have and the methodology to actually spit out the emissions profile at the end. So this all sits under the GPC, and this all sits under Snapshot. I think there's now 10 or 12 pretty massive and ugly spreadsheets under Snapshot. Sorry, Matt, for calling it ugly, but I think you know what I mean. So you can do it yourself, and you can join and learn through the City Climate Planner program. It's pretty boring, unless you are that way inclined, but we think it's a lot more efficient to have it done and undertaken centrally by experts, groups of experts, or working groups that can then provide the information for everyone. And so that's why Matt has been, I guess, so incredibly valuable to this whole process, because he was involved in the development of this profile, or sorry, of the actual GPC protocol. So Matt, there are a few questions that came from previous webinars that we want to start with, if that's okay. And then we've got a few things that might trigger the thoughts of others who might want to ask about data, because data and transport data was some of the feedback that came out from the last ones. I guess the first question here, Matt, is what does the council do if they want to provide data into Snapshot to improve accuracy? What's your take on that?
Well, Lex, I'm sure you could say that I could probably talk for a little while on this. The short answer is that there's two primary channels. So one is where, if for any reason you're interested in having a different emissions inventory that's prepared through some other channel, see another consultant report or internally prepared or like, and you would like that represented through Snapshot, we can do that. We call it a hard code bypass, and it's basically means that information will then be displayed. We'll also provide a link to that report. If it's available online, we'll provide a link to that report so that people can go straight and see that report directly. So it allows the council to be sort of viewed through the Snapshot portal, but allows you to use your own data sets. The alternative one, if you're looking to sort of improve Snapshot, so work within the Snapshot framework, but improve the quality of the data in Snapshot. In that instance, we're always really interested in data sources like that. We obviously look at and take into account information like that a lot. But it will mean that we'll get like our technical team, myself or one of our dev teams, to take a look at that data and go through how, so to start doing robustness testing of the data sets, like reliability. We actually apply a lot of demands on data provision, in the sense of like we want things to be sort of robust, transparently gathered, strong preference for repeatable. So that means like there's some confidence that the data will be provided on an ongoing basis. And also importantly, we very much look at the profiles as like their function being to assist with the intercompatibility and the collaboration of between regions and the aggregation of data between regions. So where we like places a lower priority data that's like sort of unique to a specific municipality, and very much look towards where we can sort of maybe obtain that same data for many municipalities.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Another question here, and then we'll open it up. We heard from the last ones that, let's not have it as rushed and give some time for this. And so we've got three of the, I think, most experienced local government practitioners probably in Australia. And that just realised, Matt, I gave you the smallest of introductions by circling your name on the GPC report, but I should just mention that Matt's probably worked on more emissions profiles for Australian councils than anyone ever. He's the head of data analytics at Ironbark and works at on Snapshot probably pretty much full time, but also seeing how other partners and stakeholders can be incorporated within it. And he's been at Ironbark for about 4 or 5 years. Another question, Matt, and yeah, look, let's try and keep them, just because it is a webinar, to probably a minute or two. An interesting one, especially for some of the more regional Queensland councils. How reliable is the data for regional councils? And from a transport point of view, does it include agricultural transport, tractors, trucks on farms, etc.?
So the data sets and the methods that were employed were originally developed out of municipal, like sort of inner city type municipalities. And so originally the data was definitely better reflected the circumstances of those cities. We've been working quite strongly towards trying to improve understanding about how to apply to more regional areas. So the last year, for instance, has been largely focused on non-municipal municipalities, so like regional rural locations, and dealing with all of the issues associated with that, such as the presence of very high emissions intensity, very localized activities like mining, and as you mentioned, agriculture. So the allocations for agriculture, we're quite confident about. I feel like we're probably unlikely to see any substantive movement on that. That's going to be sit quite well. Allocations for transport-related emissions, that's an area that's going to be seeing some improvement. So the main improvement will be that we're currently going through analysis of the Google transport data, the EIE data, and extrapolating out what that data, how that applies to municipalities that are unable to be reported by Google because of scale and other benchmarking issues from their perspective. So we're going to be extrapolating that out and looking to see what that result looks like. And that may see some movement on transport-related emissions and particular agricultural transport. So I'd expect there to be a little bit of movement in that regard. We're quite interested in doing that. Once we do that, I would say that almost certainly that will then become the gold standard for transport. It's unlikely that there'd be sort of more robust methods available there. So yeah, there's a couple of factors. And then we'll also be looking at land use. So land use at the moment is not bad, but there is some scope for improvement in that as well. So which we're currently going through processes for.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And while I open it up to everybody in a few seconds, I'll just answer another question just now, I guess, for the EIE sort of data. So that was I guess Matt's gone through and explained the broader approach, and especially with transport. So one of the issues at the moment with the Google, I shouldn't say issues, one of the limitations is that a certain thresholds for population and population density are required before you can have a profile or that real data from Snapshot, from EIE, simply because with lower numbers there are going to be issues around privacy, and this information is all available online. They go through all the detail. But what happens is we can still use that information to make sure we're not just assisting improving the accuracy or granularity of councils that have that data, but then we use a lot of sort of big data analysis to try and find out what it means for any council, regional, rural, whoever it might be. The other thing is that the EIE, there's a fair bit of Q&A process that we've gone through to check the Google data. Google likewise have checked our data. As you can imagine, they're not a small company, so they've got a pretty rigorous and evolving data quality process that involves manual checks and automated checks. They check to see that the EIE broadly agrees with externally available data sources like travel behaviour, gas sales, airport checkpoint volumes. So a lot of different stuff there. I think it might be, Matt, someone, if you guys can just keep yourselves on mute behind the scenes when you're not talking. And also a bit of ground truthing. So they just compared the EI data with ground truth data for Mountain View, Boulder in the US, and Dublin in Ireland, I think, at a lot of different points on road tolls and different transport information, try and validate it. And they generally find that they have a pretty close, what they call Pearson's correlation, which shows that the correlation is pretty impressive and pretty close, and then they can then apply that to the data and the processes that they use throughout the world. I'm going to move to a question from Tim here online, but before I do, I just want to use this to jog everybody's memories and have a think about the sort of things that we've discussed over the last 3 webinars, and what we've got today, and the people we've got on board that are here to answer questions about alliances, the Google data, community climate action, targeting action, anything you like, we'll do our best. The future of Snapshot, getting to net zero, different views on that with Dave Micklejohn, Portia Odell and Matt Sullivan here. There's, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 years maybe of local government and climate action work under their belts. So jump into the GoToWebinar question box. But in the meantime, a question, David. So David, Portia and Matt, just keep yourself muted, please, until a question comes your way, or if you want to jump in at any time. But a question is, are you able to share the terms of reference for NAGA, David?
Yes. Yes, I can. More than happy to do that. I'll send that through you, Lex, is probably the best thing.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, David. Another question here. What sort of, do you find that there's funding available for alliances that you wouldn't have necessarily just as individual councils?
I think, yes, it makes it easier to pull together. So a lot of the state government projects or a lot of the state government funding that's come through in the last, say, 4 or 5 years has often had a strong element of it can't just be one council, it needs to be for a network of councils. So one of the things alliances do is just pull that together much quicker and easier than if it's one council then having to go and ask their neighbours or ask other councils. Because the increasingly, as I said, because we're working cross alliance, if you're a say a growth area council in Naga, you may be interested in a particular funding package, which is primarily for growth areas, but you may not have good relations or know of growth area councils in other greenhouse alliances. So you go through your greenhouse alliance to be able to say, okay, who are the ones out in the west and the south and the east and so on of Melbourne, and we'll link you up together and pull that kind of project together. So I think that's the thing that really makes it a lot easier. It's not that funding is conditional on being a member of a greenhouse alliance, it's just easier access to it in the first place.
Great. A question maybe with a different hat of yours on. How many Queensland councils have declared climate emergencies, and based on your experience, what are the risks or disadvantages of declaring a climate emergency?
1 so far in Queensland, Noosa is it. You could probably talk to them about their particular risks from a Queensland perspective, but I think generally the main risks I think are twofold. One, in terms of declaring, is it's political. Well, some councils and some council laws are not comfortable with the emergency language, and I totally understand that. So there's an issue there about whether you get to declaration in the first place, because you've got some people who say either this conflates issues around emergency management, or we just don't believe in climate change, and therefore we're never going to get to that in the first place. So, you know, that might be one of those things. In terms of governance, I think the big risk is further down the track, which is if you've got especially a community-driven declaration for a climate emergency, so you've had a very strong community campaign to be able to do that, and you as a council say, right, fine, we'll declare a climate emergency, it goes through, it passes the council and all that, and then you do nothing. I think that's a risk in terms of a reputational risk for council and how it relates to its community. I'm not sure that all climate emergency declared councils have got that yet. I think some have, but I think there's a lot who have also done the thing in the same way that they would for a number of different initiatives. They've ticked the box and that's it, and they've done nothing different. You know, I did have one council, not in Queensland, which told us, you know, we signed a climate emergency declaration to get school kids off our back. So if that's your motivation, then there's a potential danger of backlash from the community later on, because they're going to hold you to account to say, you declared an emergency, why haven't you done anything different?
David, I've got a question here for you. How do we get, and it's sort of been touched on, I guess, with your last answer, about how do we get community or political support for a declaration? And I guess you kind of hinted that if the support's not there, then maybe a different approach is required. But the question, how do we get community or political support for a climate emergency declaration?
Yeah, community support is often driven by existing climate action groups within the community. So I think if you've got a climate action group or a suitable sustainability group that you think is going to want to take this on, It's a matter of going and talking to them about what it would mean to declare a climate emergency and what the expectations would be, both from the community group and how they would have that relationship with council. So, and if you're interested, again, that's one of those things, happy to follow up, is that there are a number of community groups that have played a really strong role in driving declarations. You've got a council like Queensland Council, which is a small shire here in Victoria. The community group plays such a strong role, and the council had very limited resources to be able to do anything. So the council effectively turned over the writing of the climate emergency declaration and the actual plan, the subsequent plan, to the community group. So it really relies on having community groups with the capacity and the expertise to be able to sort of push this forward. But it's also one of those things that one of the things that Climate Emergency Australia is trying to do is to look at how do we link those community groups in different states, so they can, in the same way that councils can learn from one another, those community groups can learn from one another as well. If you've got that sort of group and you're interested in that, then please feel free to contact me and I'll see what I can do.
Thanks, David. Portia, a question just in regards to other organisations. So we've got mainly councils on the line, but a couple of sort of non-councils, I guess, or people that work in their communities as well. Really interesting to hear that other organisations might be able to join Cities Power Partnership. Can you give us a little bit more detail about that? Like, is there the potential, for example, for a community climate action group to join Cities Power Partnership, or how would that work, or how far down the track are we with the thinking there?
Sure, thanks, Lex. So at the moment, we're looking at the partnership opportunities for local government associations and groups in particular. So focusing in on whether it's state, local government associations, or smaller groupings like the Hunter Joint Organization. At this stage, the way we're structuring that partnership, and it's still early days, would be that the organization has an opportunity to select pledges that they are then going to support within their groups of councils. So they might choose to support electric vehicles, and that will be their pledge. And the partnership opportunity there is for us to provide them with support, as well as free resources for any councils that join us as members, and connections as needed. I think there is an opportunity for us to look at how community organizations fit within the Cities Power Partnership, but I think that we're still very early days in thinking about how that could work. But there definitely is a lot of interest from community organizations. But at the moment, our primary focus is supporting local government stakeholders and people within council. So that's our primary objective.
Cool. I was going to ask whether maybe that means that Snapshot could join, but Snapshot's not actually a thing then that can pledge. Is that correct?
Yes, not at this stage, but who knows? We might unfold new partnership opportunities in the future.
Awesome. And everyone rest assured that these organisations, and I know that Snapshot speak to CPP and the different local government climate organisations are getting a hell of a lot better at sort of sharing info and working together. And the event that you mentioned briefly, there's an event or two, maybe just a quick reminder, Portia, about those events coming up, if you will, and we can also send that out. I know you've obviously got your contacts there, but they're available for all Queensland councils. What are those ones again?
Yeah, so we have two events, one after another on May 11th. This is open to all Queensland councils. I know some of you on the call have already registered to join. Basically, we're starting the day with a 2-hour workshop focusing on renewable energy and specifically PPA opportunities for local governments. And then we move into an evening session where we'll hear from local government panel as well as a whole bunch of other exhibitors on various solutions for Queensland. And there'll be a number of state government ministers and MPs there as well. So it's a great opportunity to have a chat to other and network, as well as hear about some other opportunities that are going around Queensland. So feel free, we can send that information around, but that's completely free to attend. So if you're interested in joining on the 11th, let us know.
Great, thanks, Portia, and certainly the feedback that we always get from the CPP events. So they're really innovative. The way they set the workshops, the facilitation up. So definitely get along there. And I think that'll also come out a broader CPP conference coming up in late May. And here are all the links here. I think Dave Micklejohn, Naga, send out this Naga news information where they every day send through the information, I guess, nicely curated from the likes of Renew Economy and the Conversation and the Works. And there was one yesterday saying that there's a lot of big nationwide CPP events coming up, so please keep an eye out for that. Question here, Matt, is there going to be from Snapshot a regular release or annual release of data? And Matt, while you jump in, we'll keep these to 30 seconds if we could, please.
30 seconds, yes. We're just doing a major update to the administration of Snapshot, and we will be having, at minimum, a major annual release. We're actually going to be going for so one major annual release updating all of the data sets, and then we'll have regular communications about any minor updates and potential changes or data set availability.
Yeah, awesome. What in your mind is the big next data problem we need to resolve?
30 seconds is way too short to answer that. But like the
elevator pitch.
So the issue is we will move into a situation where the question becomes less abstract. So as in like, what is the data opportunities, and more saying like, what data enables us to do certain things, certain actions. And so it's going to be much, much more driven by action, by the types of actions we're trying to do and requiring the data to support it. And the playing field there will be in cohort comparisons and being able to track changes between cities. And so that's intercity comparisons of a range of different metrics and dynamic cohort design. So we're going to be doing some presentations on that, but that essentially, that will be where the conversation will go.
Thank you. That was like under 30 seconds. I reckon that was 20. So if you want to have 40 for this last one, I think that's possibly okay. Can Google assist the council in incorporating off-road cycle paths into its functionality so it can be captured?
So cycling is collected, so it doesn't collect, and so that means that data is already available and it's already part of the data that's presented. It's not contingent on traveling on specific cycle routes per se. So we can work with councils. So Ironbark is actually being financed by Google to work with councils on discussing these very issues and providing support with how to work through this. But we will, but yeah, we're very excited about what a lot of these non-emissions based transport modes, like walking, cycling, and how that data is being gathered and how it can be used strategically by councils.
Great. Thanks, Matt. There's a quick question here that I'll try and finish up on around. It's an interesting one, the EIE data, because obviously that's real data. We've got the cars moving and it's because of phones and devices, but how do you determine the vehicle occupancy factor? Which I understand is very challenging to capture consistently across the world due to a dizzying array of vehicle capacities and transport behaviours. So they use assumptions from the US Department of Transport for different modes of, you know, a certain number of people per passenger vehicle or a certain number of people per bus. And for high occupancy public transport modes such as trains and subways, they use a different model as well. But luckily all of this stuff, and just like the Snapshot methodology, there's so much online if you really want to get into the guts of how all this works. Thank you, everybody. We're going to wrap it up now. If you were to jump on that thing now, you would be able to give feedback and receive automatically the slide deck from the first two webinars, all of them, and from today. But hold off, because I'll send you an email in the next hour or two and make sure we've got the updated ones from today on there as well. But we will close up here. This has been recorded and will be available, as the other two webinars have been available as well. I'd just like to thank the guests today. So Dave Micklejohn from NAGA, Climate Emergency Australia, Porsche O'Dell from Cities Power Partnership, and Matt Sullivan from Ironbark. It's a wealth of knowledge, and we really appreciate you guys coming along and giving the update and answering the questions. Special thanks to Beyond Zero Emissions, who we haven't got in the virtual room today, but Imogen Jubb and Heidi Edmonds, who have been involved in the 3 webinar series from the start, and also Susan and Alice, who are currently our main contacts within the department, DES within Queensland, who have been funding this whole process. We really appreciate it, along with the input from Dorian. That's it for now. We'll catch you on the other side. Any other questions that you have, of course, you can always email through, but thanks for joining us today. Thanks, everybody.